First off, on this debt ceiling, Maya, how much of a risk is it at this point that we really would run into it, and how much should people be focused on it in terms of a concern?
Well, I don't think we're going to hit the debt ceiling, and I don't think we're going to default. But what I should be incredibly clear on is to do so would be the height of irresponsibility. There's a lot of irresponsible things that go on in Washington these days, but setting off some kind of massive weapon against our own economy and perhaps the global economy because members of Congress can't agree on things is just preposterously stupid. So the fact that we are even talking about defaulting, it's not where we as a great country should be. But luckily, I don't think that's what's going to happen. What I'm more concerned about at this point is we will raise the debt ceiling, but we will do so alongside of some very fiscally irresponsible policies and actually make the situation worse.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have you on periodically, of course, to discuss the fact that we're not being particularly responsible. I mean, we're running $1 trillion deficit this year. It's clear the tax cuts in no way are paying for themselves. We've got defense spending at all-time highs. We've got nobody trying to reform entitlements the way conceivably we would need to. Maya, do you ever think that perhaps you're better off in a different profession?
Such a sad question and so profoundly true. I mean, I absolutely do, in that I worry that we will not be able to fix this overall fiscal situation of this country until we bring our lawmakers together in a way that they are more willing to compromise, recognize that we are a country of differences and that we're going to have to work those out, focus on the long-term health of the country instead of just short-term wins, and really good policy instead of politics. That is a heavy lift. And to be quite frank, I'm very honest about the ability of our country to really get ahead of these problems right now. That said,
don't you feel like it's going to take a crisis, Maya? Isn't it that really what it's going to be? I mean, when we talk about these long-term risks, that really people don't seem to be able to focus on them until it's right in front of their face.
Yeah, for sure. The model of change here will either come from a crisis, which could come from so many different things, and would be so foolhardy to have let that happen when we have all of these things benefiting our economy and allowing us to be so strong and be the safe haven. Or the optimistic one, which I grow less confident will happen, but political leadership. We need, in the 2020 election, if somebody were to start talking about this issue in a responsible way and force it on the agenda, that would help. If members of Congress are willing to stand up and say, I will not make the situation worse, we have to do this because it helps the economy, it helps keeps us secure. I mean, we're very vulnerable right now, and morally, it's the right thing to do. You don't leave your country horribly indebted when you leave it to the next generation. But we haven't seen signs of strong enough leadership yet. So yes, a crisis becomes the more likely thing that will push this, say interest rates going up. If interest rates go up 1 percentage point, our interest payments increase by $190 billion a year. But the reason I don't give up on this is it's too important not to care about. It is the foundation of our economy, and we really do need to bring lawmakers and voters all into understanding why the health of our country depends on a sustainable fiscal policy.
And Maya, speaking of a crisis, you say in your op-ed that we've never seen deficits of this size when the economy is this strong. So what happens if we run up these large deficits and we do see a significant recession or a large-scale war or something that does require significant spending? How do these deficits play a role, and what happens, especially since we don't really have as much of a historical precedent for something like that?
Yeah, that's exactly the right question, because it's not as though you feel the pain of a deficit every day the way you do from rising healthcare costs or high taxes or all the other things that affect us directly. But high deficits leave us incredibly vulnerable for the changes that will come along. And when you look on the horizon of this country, we know, a number of changes and challenges. First, when we go into the next recession, our debt will be twice as high relative to the economy as it was when we went into the recession of 2008. That weakens our fiscal policy response to a recession, potentially making it worse. But it also means that if there's a national security threat, we're not nearly as safe as we would be to respond. We have to borrow much of our financing from abroad, particularly from countries we aren't always aligned with. And we also know there are big changes to our economy structurally from globalization that's been going on for a while, but increasingly from technology. And we have not built a budget or an economy that's really ready to prepare for those huge changes. The pace of change is ever growing. And it's just immensely short-sighted that we are pretending we can borrow our way to prosperity when it's actually really a recipe for a very slow and potentially risky economy going forward.
Hey, Maya, you mentioned borrowing from abroad. China still is the largest holder of our debt, but their holdings are down for 3 months in a row and the lowest since May of 17. I mean, what's the thinking about whether or not they would use that so-called nuclear option to dramatically cut their holdings?
Yeah, that's exactly right, which is that most people don't think that you're going to see a huge treasury dump from China per se, because it would hurt them as much or more than it would hurt the U.S. But here's the situation. We are in a trade war with China. We have growing tensions about how to have our economies, technologies work together in a more productive way. And right now, the biggest tool we're using is tariffs. But if China were to switch and use the tool that they are our biggest lender outside of the U.S. and they can affect the prices in our markets, they have a potentially very strong weapon. And in my mind, this is a huge reminder that this country should not make itself so vulnerable as to be dependent on other countries, particularly those that we are having tensions with, to lend us some money for the basic operations of government. So many of these scenarios I don't think are likely, but it's though there's warning signs on every single dashboard of this country and economy that we are making really dangerous choices as we go along.
Maya, back to the debt ceiling itself. Trump and Pelosi are nothing if not a wild card in terms of their relationship, which is not particularly good. When should we really start to get concerned if there is not congressional action on the debt ceiling?
Well, I mean, it could be as soon as the next few weeks. The problem, of course, is that we really want to get it done before Congress goes on recess, though I would point out to members of Congress, don't go on recess if you haven't lifted the debt ceiling. It's the height of your responsibility to leave town without this being resolved. But it could be in 1 to 2 months, and then if we get through some big moments where we get more revenue in, we may have more months to play with. But the point is, we shouldn't be budgeting this way. We jump from one crisis to the next. Keep in mind, we don't even have a budget in place for this huge country this year, and we're on track not to have a budget for next year. And so instead of ever planning, laying out strategies, being smart and thoughtful about the priorities that we're making and how we're paying for them, we jump from one crisis to another. So the fact that we know we have a few weeks or at most a few months to deal with this debt ceiling means we've already waited way too long. Frankly, we should have lifted it before we got into this period of extraordinary measures, which would have been months ago. And we should have lifted it coupled with a plan to improve the debt, rather than what they'll probably do is lift the debt ceiling along with a plan that will make the debt even worse.